Hello, hello. This is the Cosmerian, and welcome to Tiny Talk. I am joined here by Esper, Gray, and Abby, and I will just introduce everybody, and then we'll get into the content. I am the Cosmerian. I've been playing Tiny Leaders since mid-2023. I have been playing the format nonstop since I've joined, and have been, in addition to one of the leading forefronts in the YouTube channel, just been the local counter meta lover and maker of weird decks. On to Esper.
Hey there, folks. I'm Esper Completed. I've been playing this format since around late 2022, and I've been a big fan of it ever since. I generally play a lot of mid-range and control-heavy decks, generally going much more towards the metagame.
And Gray, how about you?
I'm Gray. I'm an L2. Have been judging for about 7 years now. I got involved in Tiny about 3 years ago after meeting Sarah. She kind of brought me into the fold. And I've been kind of working behind the scenes on rules and policy under her supervision, trying to keep things moving smoothly, make sure events and even just everyone's side gameplay kind of works smoothly and everyone has fun.
And last but not least, our community guest star, Abby. How about you?
Hey folks, I'm Abby. I've been playing Magic for a while now, but Tiny I've only been in for about the last year or so, and it very quickly became one of my favorite formats that I have been playing, just like Cause, pretty much nonstop as of late. I've been trying to do my own thing. When a Johnny was a problem, I was playing Arabella. When Najila is the best 5-color deck, I'm playing Ezio. So I'm halfway to being the sweatiest, but not fully there.
All right. Our first question is going to be on the casual versus competitive nature of the format, and specifically, what do we mean by when we say casual or competitive? Just kind of defining that. And I'll just send it off to Esper. What's your thoughts on when we say, in terms of Tiny Leaders, competitive and casual? What do you generally think?
I generally take this as the actual deck-building philosophy when you're playing. Most formats have a competitive mindset where you play one of the top decks with most of the best cards, and you go for just winning. Then there's formats much more like Commander, where that's generally not the case, ignoring CDH, where winning isn't really the main goal. Not to say that is a hard and fast divide. A lot of casual decks, my EDH decks included, do often aim for winning quick and well, and through interaction. I think the actual divide there is competitive as trying to do that as efficiently or as fast or as consistently as possible. Where casual, you're much more likely to do something a little off the wall, a little more crazy. And this is also not a hard or fast divide. There is a sliding scale from Tier 1 down to Tier 2 to Tier 3 to uncompetitive decks. This is a full scale that casual and competitive spans the whole reach of.
Okay. What's your thoughts, Gray? I know you have some strong thoughts on this particular question.
I actually really do. Recently in the committee server, I basically typed out a whole paragraph explaining why I think that casual versus competitive are labels that the community is probably better off without, as they are more often used as divisive labels rather than descriptors of playstyles. And I feel that we'd probably be better off if we move towards we are Magic players, or in this case, Tiny Leader players first and foremost, who have fun playing a competitive deck rather than we are competitive or casual players.
Okay, I see. Interesting. And Abby, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess not to rehash any of that. I think the only thing that is for me is it's a language thing, because I've had this conversation with people. where when they say competitive and when I say competitive, it does feel like we're saying different things, because I think it does come down to what you're talking about and where you're coming from. And I think that for sure, it really matters where you're coming from. If you came from 60 card formats and you're asking, is this a competitive format? They might just be asking, does that mean what I'm trying to do is win? And if what competitive means is trying to win, then yeah, that's what that means. You can simplify it. But I also do agree that there is a uh, there's a sliding scale. If I say that I don't think, when I say Arabella is my competitive deck, it means I think it's my most competitive deck. But inherently, I would say that the format is competitive. I mean, that's getting off topic a little with that. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough because it really does come down to a perspective you're talking about, and if you don't agree on the words going into it, you're talking past each other. And I do agree with the idea that, to a sense, both words can be used divisively and to have a negative connotation. So, when I say competitive, personally, what I mean is my goal is to win, but that's a nuanced thing. So,
Yeah, and I think my opinion is that there are kind of two competitives and two casuals. So there is competitive in the sense of, okay, we are playing the best decks with the goal of winning and nothing else. And then there's competitive in the way that I usually play, which is I want to win, I want to beat the best decks out there, but I'm doing it in a way that possibly could be done more generically by other decks, but I want to bring something special to the meta. And so that might be playing a tier 2 deck, but when we're saying tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, generally speaking, that's what flavor of competitive, how good is it into this meta. And I think casual is very much in that same boat, where you have casual as in, I want to win, but in this particularly unique way. Potentially not the most optimal way, but a particularly special way. And then there is the EDH version of it, which is I don't necessarily want to win, I want to do a thing, and I want to let my opponent do a thing. And I think when people talk about casual versus competitive, what most people mean, or at least what I generally mean, is when I mean casual, I mean, sure, I've created a oops all ball lightning decks before. So the goal is to win. The goal is to win via a bunch of ball lightnings, but I'm still trying to kill my opponent. And then when I say competitive, I don't necessarily mean I'm playing Najila and I'm playing all the best cards in the format and I'm just going to stomp people. It is I'm playing something like Lagrella or Jarina or even my silly Grist bug stack, where my goal is to win in a way that people aren't expecting and trying to shove a deck that nobody has seen before into the meta. So not necessarily the top of the top, but still there to fight against other spooky decks. And yeah, what are y'all's thoughts on that? What are some rebukes to other people? How do we think we should define competitive and casual going forward?
What I would really like to call out is that I agree with Gray. People are not competitive or casual. Decks are. A person might at the top of this episode I said I generally lean competitive, but that's because I prefer playing more competitive decks usually. That doesn't mean I am confined to competitive. No person is ever confined to one or the other, especially it being such a spectrum. And any single deck can be more competitive or more casual, depending on the person playing it.
I've found that competitive and casual is best used a descriptor of your mindset, right? Because you can go to a competitive event. I've seen players go to 5K events and show up with a deck that looks nothing like an actual deck for that format, and their only goal is to win one game, and then they'll go 3-0 and then drop because they already exceeded their expectations. And even though it's a competitive event and their deck is performing competitively, by most people's metrics, that would they would consider themselves to be casual. And then you'll have the opposite end of that spectrum, where a competitive person, their whole goal is to win. But when you start applying these labels to people and not to decks or playstyles or to events themselves, then you run the risk of turning those labels into groups and returning to otherisms, such as, I pointed this out in my Wallow text on the committee server, filthy casuals or sweaty tryhards, and other derogatory language that may not seem that way at first, but once you start using these terms over and over again, they don't encourage community building. They don't encourage togetherness.
Yeah, yeah. And I think the biggest thing that I'm kind of seeing right now is that divide being seen of when people come to play a game on our server or come into leagues or the weekend tiny brawls. What should they bring and how do they play against the type of deck that they feel would give them the best experience? Like, my Oops All Ball Lightnings decks, I don't necessarily want to play against an optimized Najila deck. I want to play against a more sillier type of deck. But how do I say that and how do I represent that without it being ambiguous or confusing? And I think that's a similar thing with a lot of people of, I think the biggest divide that we have is that there are people coming from EDH, like myself, or people coming from Legacy. And those are two very different environments with very different mindsets. And trying to express those differences in mindsets with that simple phrasing without it being confusing and alienating one group or the other.
Yeah. Mostly, yeah. So that's the interesting thing is that as much as I do agree that, like, in theory, using the terms probably risks running that sort of othering language. And like I've been playing not just Magic, but like plenty of competitive games for a while, and I've seen that lots, and I've seen that a lot of it is in part people accidentally running into what you would quote unquote maybe say the other side, people who want to play more casually that accidentally end up getting matched into more competitive players, so on and so forth. And that breeds a negative feeling. So they associate the other side poorly, and that comes up in the language. But we don't want to completely avoid the language because, like you say, it is important because if we want to have this community format where sometimes people are going to show up with the best of the best decks and want to play them, obviously we have the spaces for that in events and stuff. And I think that for the most part, if you're signing up for like an event, you kind of maybe have a better sense of that. And as long as, like, hey, if you want to be that person that shows up to the 5K with your rogue deck that probably doesn't realistically have a shot to just get 1 point, that's fine because that's cool. You do that. You know that going into there. But is the question of, do you want that to extend to every aspect of the format if you don't use the language? Because, like you said, if someone says, I want to play my, bear typal deck, and it's going to get stomped by a lot of other decks, and there's no way to express that they want to play against more casual people, is that going to be good for them to have that experience because we just don't want to use the words because risking creating the negative association and othering.
So that actually is a very good point. That maybe I could have been a lot more clear in the language that I've been using. That labels aren't inherently good or bad in and of themselves. It's how they're used. And when labeling people is when you start running into those moral and ethical questions. And it's more you should be actually when Casmarian mentioned coming from EDH, I think we can take a really big lesson from there in the rule zero conversation, especially when not engaged in like a structured event. When you're trying to just get games going in the server, having some kind of even just a short pre-game discussion about what your expectations are and what you're trying to do would be a lot more productive than just saying, "Oh, I'm trying to be competitive" or "I'm trying to be casual." Because again, as has been demonstrated just by the discourse here, there leaves a lot open to interpretation.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the things that I always do, if I don't spell it out in the kind of call for, hey, I'm interested in playing a game, if I don't spell out there of like, I'm trying something silly or competitive testing or whatever, I will generally, first thing I do is, okay, what are we looking for? Do you want me to play a competitive deck or a less competitive deck? What do you want to test your deck against? What do you want to play? Or say, like, hey, I have this less competitive deck that I want to play. Are you good with playing a jankier deck?
Yeah, there's for sure use in saying, I'm looking for a competitive game, I'm looking for a more casual game, I'm looking to play with a competitive deck, I'm looking to play against a casual deck. There's definitely a lot of use there in actually curating the sort of game or testing that you're looking for. Because especially when you're playing, like, for testing for an event, you don't want to be running into random merfolk typal in 2025 modern that doesn't have actual legs. Maybe merfolk does, I don't know.
I think it does.
It might. But you're looking to actually run into meta decks to see how your deck fares into them generally. And you'd much rather play against a much more real deck. And that's perfectly fine, because that's the type of game you're looking for. And that's what these labels can actually be used for good for, in actually curating the sorts of games you want to play.
Yeah, I guess I think we all pretty much generally agree on that as like a baseline thing. It's I guess the question of how do we want to how nuanced do you want to be with that, right? Because as we've said, like even in competitive, there is a difference between you know however you structure them, tier one, tier two, tier three. I mean, casual is a little looser, but that's what I've said with some people where it's like there's like full on sweat competitive. There's sort of I'm competing, but I'm not necessarily fully optimized, and then there's like the semi casual, which is to me semi casual is what I would say is like in taking from EDH as an example is like what I would call most of like these days the bracket 3 idea of I have a win con, I'm trying to win, but I'm not going into this like caring that much if I win or not. But I'm not trying to eschew any chance of winning. And then like casual is of course just trying to do the thing, right? Like just trying to get off a silly combo or something, even if it doesn't succeed, right? It's like if I built what's her name that got banned in Pioneer, Amelia something or other, who every time you explore you gain life. If like I build that as a commander in Tiny, literally just to try to get to the point where she gets to 20 and blows everything else up, and she gets removed and I don't win, then that's fine, you know. And that's if I'm playing that as like super casual, that's good. I guess the question then is just like again, how nuanced do we want to be about that? And I guess this jumps to a later point that we can bring up, like how we implement that in the server and general discussions.
Yeah, and I think that very easily segues into the next question, which is kind of broadening a scope because we've been talking about, I think this is a very easy question to answer when you're talking specific events, specific games, just kind of promoting that Rule Zero conversation and kind of promoting expectations when you're playing certain events. But the biggest thing that I'm wondering is this format as a whole, is Tiny Leaders Reborn a competitive format inherently? I think this is something that some people have very strong opinions about. Some people think that it's an inherently competitive format because they're coming from that competitive background. And a lot of the discussion, especially in the server, is dedicated to that competitive look at things. But does that mean that this is an inherently competitive format where we want to prioritize competitive play? Or is this a format that you can do with what you make of it, right? And I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Let's start with Esper.
So, coming at this from my own sort of tinted lenses, I enjoy this format most when I'm playing mostly competitively, right? But even so, I wouldn't say this is an inherently competitive format. I don't think any format truly is. But something like Vintage, where basically every time you're sitting down, you're expecting someone to do something dumb and consistent with interaction. You're expecting the pretty much the best decks because there's not too much actual range below them. But this format, it's being a 50 card singleton, especially having a large coming from EDH player base. I think there's certainly room for that entire spectrum. Whether it's a random, like, Drafna founder at Latinam random mono blue artifacts deck, or you're doing the actual 5-color Najila pile, one of the top mid-range decks. There is that whole range there. And I think that people can and are playing decks up that entire spectrum.
Yeah, 100%. And Gray, what's your thoughts?
I very much agree with Esper. No, very few formats are inherently competitive, particularly ones that are as have as deep a card pool as eternal formats. Just because of the depth of that card pool makes it very hard to say, oh, this format is a thing. It's like saying that painting is an inherently X hobby, or it's inherently this. There's just too much there to describe it in such a narrow way. Trying to get my thoughts together. I had a thought and then my brain derailed. It happens frequently. I'm sorry.
You're good.
Oh yeah. I will say though that the nature of it being mana value 3 or less lends itself towards more streamlined gameplay, which itself lends itself towards competitive deck building and gameplay. So while not inherently competitive, the nature of the format by its very restrictions does lend itself towards that kind of gameplay just because that's what happens when you have the most efficient spells and that's all you have access to.
Yeah. And Abby, what's your thoughts?
I'll be a tiny bit of well, not even a contrarian. I'm gonna argue a little semantic thing in that here's the thing. I want to be clear. I mostly agree with that. In that, at the end of the day, you can play as long as you're following the rules. You can play formats however you want. Technically speaking, you could break the rules and go make something else. That's what we did. We took a different, well, our predecessors and then us took a different format and broke it down. But again, this does go back to the original thing about asking what is competitive. And to me, I would call the format, even when you're talking about playing the format not to the top of the tier, if I'm just being semantic about words, I would say the format is as inherently competitive as a format can be, insofar as that you're coming at this with the perspective of you are competing with the goal to win. But that's arguing words, because isn't EDH competing? Yes, but if a lot of people are primarily playing it to be social, like, I'm sure plenty of people have heard this described, that EDH is like Magic but made into a board game, where you're all sitting down to do something, and sure, you're competing with one another, but it doesn't feel like it. I think a lot of people don't sit down at a commander pod thinking, I am competing. When I sit down to play any 1v1 Magic, any 1v1 of just about anything I can think of, to me, I'm competing. Now, obviously, how casual you're playing, because, this is the difference, right? Is like, if you go to play pickup basketball and LeBron James shows up, maybe he could take it easy on you, but it is, inherently he's going to beat you. But yeah, I mean, it is really, at the end of the day, whether it's competitive or casual is a semantic discussion. So I mostly agree, but I do say that from my own perspective, I would say that any game where you are one person competing against another person, and your end goal is to win, that is technically competitive, but that's about it.
Awesome. Yeah. I think for me, this kind of boils down to your background, right? I think EDH players, by and large, are going to be coming at this from a casual angle. I know I was when I first joined. And so, trying to do a thing that's interesting, something you would build in an EDH deck, except smaller. And I think for people that are used to Legacy, Legacy is generally the format where you're going to be playing the big stuff. Not quite as silly as Vintage, but a little bit pretty close to that. Of, trying to win as fast as you can with whatever you can come up with. And I think there's a balance to be struck between those two. And have a very firm opinion that we are not an inherently competitive format. I think we are definitionally we are a 1v1 format, which will lean itself to be more competitive than EDH. However, you can certainly all bets are off when you're playing multiplayer, which you can do. I have a local paper pod where we play 3-player Tiny Leaders, because if you can't find 4 or 5 people and 3 people all want to play Tiny Leaders, you're gonna probably play 3-player. I think it's an interesting conversation to have, but I think a lot of it boils down to how we're going to implement that, which we'll get to later. But I personally think that saying that this is a inherently competitive format is going to be pushing away people that want to do less competitive things. And I think for a format as small as us, we can't afford to do that. It's the sort of thing where if we wanted to, we could create 2 servers. I don't think we have enough moderation for 2 servers, but it's the sort of thing where I think I agree with Gray 100% that there is a pull towards competitive, and I think the question is, do we resist that pull, or do we ride with it? And we'll get to that later, but first I want to know you guys' thoughts on each other's thoughts. Basically, is there something that somebody else has said that you want to agree with or rebuke? What's your guys' thoughts?
So talking about the sort of ideas of our dissenter, Abby, I definitely don't disagree, right? A 1v1 format where both players are trying to win, that's what competitive means, and that is generally the expected play mode, and that is the expected play mode and usual play mode of Tiny Leaders. I definitely agree that that's very definitional. But I think it's more because no format is going to be 100% always competitive, because that's not how people play games. Saying that the format is generally competitive, I think is accurate, because we do, on the server at least, and from what I've seen, play competitive more often than we play very casual. But obviously it is still a spectrum again, and we're never going to be exactly on some side of that.
I also like the points that Abby brought up, that Commander is generally could be generally thought of as a board game more than Magic, or rather Magic turned into a board game. And competitive versus casual, again, coming back to my previous point, is more of a mindset thing, and could also be translated into what is your primary goal. If your primary goal is to do a thing that is not necessarily winning, then your play mode could be considered to be casual. But if your primary goal is winning, then that is where you start entering the realm of competitive. And that could apply to basically any format that you sit, or any game that you sit down to, whether it be Yahtzee, even. If you're just playing to, and your primary goal is to spend time with the person that you're playing with, then you wouldn't really call that a competitive game. But if you sit down to play Yahtzee and your goal is to beat the person that you're sitting down with, then you could reasonably call it a competitive game of Yahtzee.
Yeah, no, I mean, and that's the thing, right? Is at the end of the day, when I say inherently competitive, again, it was mostly a semantic thing, and like, because it, it changes, right? If I'm the real thing is that when we say is the format inherently competitive, how much of that is a micro, like, nuanced discussion about like us, people who are like really invested in the format, and like a thing that like people actually see on the surface? I guess that's the question, right? Because like, are people asking, is modern inherently competitive? Is standard inherently competitive? I think the only format people ever ask that about with like Magic is like Commander, because it's the unique thing that's different. And if we take a broader perspective of that, if I've never played if someone comes to me and has never played Magic or never played any card game, and for some reason wants to ask, is Magic inherently competitive? Me personally, obviously I could get into a nuanced discussion about it and say, well, technically it's inherently competitive because you're playing versus someone else. But it's about as competitive as you want it to be. And so, yeah, it's competitive, but I do understand the risk in calling your format inherently competitive about driving away more casual people. Because that's something I very much understand, and I have said to people, even though I'm like of this opinion, I also understand wanting to bring in casual people. And this is something we're going to get into, is that I think that it is better to be sort of more definitionally open and flexible to start, and let people make their own decisions about how they want to approach it, right? This is a format of a game, and at the end of the day, Magic is a game system that we can do a bunch of things with. And the only thing you can definitely say about Tiny Leaders at the end of the day is that it's a Magic the Gathering format.
When you make a good point, you make a good point, and there really isn't much more to add on to that. I mean, that very well put, very succinct. I can never pronounce that word.
Succinctly, I think.
Succinct.
Yes,
Succinct. There we go.
so
Yeah,
succinct that,
very,
yeah.
yeah, very concisely and eloquently stated.
Well, I think that's the perfect place to move on to the third question, which is, okay, so I think we're in the general consensus that we are not necessarily inherently competitive. And then the question is, okay, so should our server lean competitive or casual, or try to strike a balance of the two of them? And I think best way to start is by sending it over to Esper and then going down the line.
So I think some sort of balance is for the best. People are coming in from EDH or from other more casual leaning formats, and they're wanting to play our cool new format that lets them do wild and wacky things, but under a constraint. And that's perfectly great. And we should have space for those people. But it being a 1v1 format where we run tournaments and there can be prizing on the line, I think it is still generally, for most people, a more competitive format, and that's a thing that should be prioritized.
Yeah. And what about you, Gray?
So one of the core tenets of judging is community building and stewardship, which I bring that up because the community itself should be what drives the focus of the server. And again, I know this is all our opinion, but I really feel like I need to state that very much that this is my opinion and in no way any form of official statement. The community is going to drive the server. If the community tends towards more competitive mindsets and competitive play, then that is going to be what gets more focus. Not all the focus, because as Esper said, we need to be welcoming to all, not towards all, because there are limits, but we need to be welcoming towards those who aren't going to be as competitively minded. But if that's where the majority of the player base is, then that's where the majority of the community is going to be, and that's going to be where the majority of the effort should be, because that's again where the majority of your community is. You don't want to put a ton of effort into, or you don't want to put the majority of your effort into the minority of your community, because then your majority is going to feel slighted. So, and I've realized that the word majority and minority kind of sound loaded here. It should be proportional. So if you have most of your player base is competitive minded, then most of your activities should be geared with that in mind. And if you have even a small portion that is more casual play minded, then throwing them a bone once in a while will go a long way towards showing them that you do recognize that they're there, you care, and that they are an important part of your community if they aren't the greatest population.
Absolutely. And Abby, our resident community human.
Yeah, so I mean, as someone who my only stakes in this format at the end of the day are like personal enjoyment and my own. I'm not a judge, I'm not a committee member. So my perspective really comes down to thinking about, and I say this with a lot of things, in a lot of video games I play. I greatly value the idea of new player experience and the onboarding that gets people into things. And so that is very much why I have, as much as I talk about it being a competitive format, I want to push back against some people who were worried about letting too much casual play influence the format. Because there were definitely some people who feel like opening it up to being so casual could potentially shift the focus away from the competitive format that they're here for. And I understand the worry. If you're someone who comes to this format as your competitive format, and it's the thing you like to work, you have like one or two decks that you iterate on a lot, and you grind on a lot, and you want to compete to your best level. Having more casual people show up and, in the more like just looking for groups and stuff, it's fine because you can not do that. But, some worry that maybe like, oh, well, I don't want to have all these like ultra casual people show up to events and kind of like ruin my like good stats of like getting good games in and stuff like that. But at the same time, most people don't start fully competitive. Like, how many people got into Magic as like their first card game and immediately went and said, I'm going to go play Legacy Shops? Like, that's so few people are that sort of person. And I very much believe that, like, my experience was when I came into here, I had played competitive formats and Commander. So I was coming here with like a mixed perspective of I like both. But when I came in here, all the first decks I made were really bad. I didn't have a sense of like the tempo of the format and like what is good and what is bad. And I think that if there was too much attitude that was anti-casual, that could have pushed me away and maybe not want to stay in the format. So I think obviously the proportional thing is very important. It is, at the end of the day, I think most important, besides where we allocate stuff for, to me, is making sure that we cultivate a community that is welcoming and understanding of people who are different than them. And I mean, I think this is a life thing in general, but I just want so that like competitive people don't shun casual people and casual people don't shun competitive people, because whoever is the large percentage of the player base, sure, they'll push when it happens, but I think that we all deserve a space here as long as we're being kind and respectful and like all here to play the game. So
two things. First off, I don't like being called out like that. My first deck that I built, or that I built when I got into the 60 card formats was Legacy Maverick. Right after it took second place at the Star City Open.
well, all right, good, good for you. I've soul read you immediately.
We do have one of the freaks here.
Yes, that is me. But also, and to be that stereotypical first year psych student, the way that we, even just the way that we talk to others and ourselves, influences the way that we think, which in turn influences the way that we act, which in turn influences the way that we think and talk, and it's all circular. So the way that you interact with our colleagues on the servers, the way that if you are someone who inclines more towards more competitive play, if you have these attitudes that those who play more casually are just a perfectly fine aspect of the community, then that will influence how you speak to them, which in turn will influence how you act towards them, which in turn will influence how you think about them, and that's feedback loop that only gets better. Whereas the inverse is also true. If you have those thoughts in the back of your mind of, oh, these people are terrible, they don't belong here, that's going to poison your thoughts, which will poison your speech and poison your actions.
And yeah, absolutely. I think I 100% agree with what everybody said of that. I think there should be a balance between competitive and casual. I think we're just too small of a format to pick sides. And that I think because we are this blend of legacy and EDH in a way, that there will be people from both groups, and if there are people from both groups, we should build the format and the community to be accepting of both walks of playing the format. So basically, I think we have a lot going on for competitive players, but we also have a lot of competitive players. I think that proportionality point is very good, but I think the kind of crux of the issue here is that we don't want to make one side feel like they're not wanted. I'm very much with Abbi, except I actually came into here even more casual. In the beginning, in the first few months, I was kind of resisting this casual push that I kept encountering of basically playing just the best cards with the best decks and leaving little room for creativity. And so I got close to saying, this might not be my format. I think if this was a more anti-casual place, if there was kind of a mindset of, well, you're here to be competitive, we don't have places for casual players, I think I probably wouldn't be here on the committee, and I wouldn't be on the format. I think it's an interesting dynamic because in the end, I will say, starting as a casual player, I've now grown into be a happily competitive player, and it's just a great time to be. This is my first actual competitive experience. I've been playing EDH and more just casual play since the beginning of my journey about 10 years ago. for Magic in general. And so encountering this as my first competitive experience was definitely a unique way to encounter it, but I think if it had been too far in the competitive direction, I just wouldn't have been playing this format, which I think would be a shame.
I want to definitely agree there. Having the space be open for competitive and casual, it both opens that doorway to the groups intermingling, obviously, where the people are going to play decks that they often wouldn't play otherwise. It's going to lead to that sort of, because no person is singularly competitive or casual, it's going to help people to broaden their own horizons, especially if a lot of the more competitive players have started casual. That's generally the pipeline. But having casual players, maybe try some more competitive decks, that's also a great experience to have. This format is a great place for that as well.
Yeah, no, I think we are a unique little ecosystem for that because, and I mean, it makes sense comparing this, because if we were as big as Commander, the like OG Commander, then we could sort of separate it out because we have a template for that. CDH exists; it very much exists. It's its own thing. If we got big enough for that, not to get into like bracket discourse, I think the brackets are better than the nebulous 1 to 10 that existed before that everyone had a subjective view of. But if we were big enough, you could really easily see us just sort of borrowing that templating of, hey, you like Tiny, you can play it ultra competitively on that side, and that's cool. There's nothing wrong with that, and there will be people who want to play in that and will play there. And then there's the more casual side, and that has its ranges, and that's where the whole Rule Zero comes in, which to a sense we already sort of have that. And I had another thought that was on the tip of my tongue that was falling off.
I'm sure you'll find it eventually. I wanted to agree with what was said. I think we're generally in agreement about the fact that we need to cater to both groups. And we'll get into this on like how we should implement that, but I will note that we've already sort of implemented that in the fact that recently in our Discord we have created a channel to talk about competitive strategies about the meta, as well as creating a ping for, hey, I want to play competitively. It's the competitive testing role. And I think those are both valuable things, but it is very much the type of thing where some people have felt a bit slighted by it, feeling like it's kind of sequestering competitive folks, which I think is something that we need to be careful with for sure. I personally think that in the end, the majority of people are competitive, and so I think it's fine if they have a ping and a channel to talk about that. The main thing that we were trying to avoid was this idea of these competitive folks that are used to thinking competitively tearing apart a casual deck list and saying, hey, don't play this card, it's not good, or don't play this commander, it's not good, or don't play this color combination, it's not good, because they don't quite understand that they're talking to a different type of person, or a different type of play style, not saying that, like, again, people are not casual, people are not competitive. It is how they choose to play, and so they're talking to a different... They're analyzing the deck wrong, is essentially what's going on.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that they're analyzing the deck wrong, but it comes, and this applies to your statement as a whole, it comes down to a matter of perspective and framing. The quote-unquote sequestering of competitive players was simply a matter of I say simply, but simple does not necessarily mean right or wrong. It was a matter of uh, a different perspective. These players that felt slighted, they, to my understanding, they already had some issues with decisions that the committee had made and was making, and this was just another in a line of disagreeable decisions. Whereas from our perspective, we weren't sequestering them. It was, hey, we're going to give you your own space where you can do your own thing and not have to worry about, hey, is this deck going to be on our level, or is it going to be on a different axis, or do I have to watch what I'm saying, or what have you? It was, hey, this is a competitive space where you all can just do your competitive things, and it's only for you. It's your own special place for you. It's not, hey, go over in the corner and be out of the way. It's, this is your space for you.
Yeah, that casual corner was very much born out of the someone posts into tavern a mostly casual deck list, gets told their commander is bad, is strictly worse than some other card, some cool signature piece is worse than just adding a Barogoyf. And that's not really what they were looking for in advice, and that's not really the experience they were looking to have. So now if you look down to our competitive corner, that's much more where you can say, this deck is not going to be good in our leagues because of X and Y factors. Here are some helpful suggestions that could make it work better in our leagues. And things like that are absolutely cool and okay there, because that's actually aimed at our competitive experience, where someone posting a random monocolor uncommon from Kamigawa as their commander over in Tavern, they're probably not looking for competitive advice. They're looking for, hey, anyone got any cool synergy pieces or cool cards I could add to this deck? And that's very much a sort of divide that we've kind of seen. And that's sort of what the competitive corner is very much all about, is leaving both of those things spaces where everyone can post their deck list and get the sort of feedback they're looking for.
Yeah, I'd say and I very much agree with all this. I think that there was a lot of what comes down to is a perception issue when that happened, because we went from a perspective where it was a pretty small, tight knit community who were mostly competitive players, and there was a big surge of new players, and a lot of them, we didn't 100% know this, but there was not just from them being new players, but because of the channels that they were coming in through, were potentially more casual. And so it's important to have those delineations. It's the same reason why when you go to a website like Reddit or any, like, for old people who remember forums back in the day, that things are in the right folders with the right tags and stuff like that, so that people know that they are in the right space to be talking about the right things. It's not to say that any one of them is better, worse, right, wrong. It's that you want to make sure you keep discussion in a place that's supposed to be that's relevant to each other. Because otherwise, if you just have one big general chat where everyone's in talking about all the same things, all a bunch of different things, at the same time, it's very disorganized. It's easy to cause confusion. People talking about things, like we've said, in the wrong sort of viewpoint. Not that they've analyzed the deck wrong. They're analyzing it from a different perspective than the person wanting it to come down is. And, it's like, we didn't take anything away from competitive people by putting the tag there. It's like if you had a city and you said, okay, well, we're going to designate this area like to a specific group of businesses or something. And it's actually still the largest part of the city that's designated to that, but it's the first time that they've actually had a designation as a part of just being the main ideal. I think that's just a perception issue at the end of the day. And once people adjust to that and realize, oh, okay, at the end of the day, this is all just about intent and organization and making things as smooth and reasonable and accessible for everybody as possible, that I think any worries about that should go away over time. But I do understand why there was some initial concerned about that.
And yeah, absolutely. I think Abby ended up hitting the nail on the head there. Of this is a perspective thing, but especially one of the other aspects of this is that we just recently got an incredible boom of people. I think, as of the recording of this, let me just check how many new people we are talking. As of the recording of this podcast, we have roughly 700 new people on the server, where we previously had around 1,400 people on the server. We now have about 2,100. And that is a gigantic amount of new people. And so we need to start creating these delineations, putting things into more clear categories. But we need to do that in a way that where people don't feel slighted.
And to be clear, on some, behind the scenes here, there was a lot of talk on if we should make a casual corner or a competitive corner, and if we should have specific looking for games roles on either. We sort of settled on it being the competitive role, because that's sort of the advice that can be most different, or the roles you're looking for that can be most different from the sort of median random decks. But it very much could have gone either way. We mostly just needed a separate space for these sort of ideas, so that people in either sort of building philosophy can flourish under them. It's not specifically to call out competitive players or casual players. It's sort of just the way things have worked out, and it's seemed fairly successful from our perspective so far.
And yeah, I think that pretty easily segues into our final question, which is, how should we implement this? I think we're in agreement that there is a balance to strike between competitive and casual player bases. And how do we want to address that? How do we want to implement that going forward? What do you think our philosophy should be? Obviously, there's only 4 people here in the group of 16 or so actual, makers, as well as the aforementioned 2,100 other people on the server. So, obviously, this is just here's our personal thoughts rather than here's our binding philosophy that you will see going forward. But what do we think? How should this idea be implemented in our format and especially in our server? And I'll start with Esper.
So I think we have taken some great first steps on that. Giving these sort of philosophies separate spaces, I think works very well. I think having the LFG tag for specifically if you're looking for competitive play is pretty useful. Still, especially if you're doing a sort of in that spectrum of more casual, still sort of elaborate on the sort of deck you're looking for. I think one of the bigger areas for this discussion is going to be the actual ban list of the format, and I think that should still lean very competitive. The actual ban list of the format is going to be used for events, for actual tournaments with prizing, and casual games much more have access to that Rule Zero ability, right? Where if you're in a tournament, you can't really say, hey, you're not playing Mill, are you? I hate Mill. Because that's not really how it works. They're playing their deck. I think the ban list very much should be focused towards competitive. Still taking a glance over at casual in case something is completely disgusting over there. But I think that the actual implementation so far, I very much like, and I'm not intending to change too much in the implementation going forward if we see similar numbers as we've seen.
Yeah, And Gray, what's your thoughts?
Esper pretty much hit it on the head with keeping the ban lists oriented towards the competitive side of things, because again, casual has that sort of check valve of the rule zero conversation, where if something's getting to be a bit too annoying, players can always decide, okay, I don't want to play against that anymore, so I'm just not going to. Whereas in events, you don't really have that option. People are going to play what they feel gives them the best chance at winning, whether or not they want to play against that or whether or not they themselves want to play that. It's just naturally what they're going to be pulled towards because of just the nature of competition. And we do have sort of an edge against or over EDH in this regard due to the smaller card pool, the fact that we started off with competitiveness in mind, and being 1v1 gives that rule zero conversation, makes it easier and gives it a bit more impact, I guess is the way of saying it.
And yeah, over to Abby.
Yeah, no, I think the only thing I want to expound on that for anyone who might be maybe, especially from an EDH perspective, might be worried about, because for the most part, yeah, we should ban for competitive because those are the most powerful things, and we have to actually care about that. And what's annoying for a casual perspective doesn't really factor in the same way that something matters in a competitive environment. And I think that we also uniquely, because of like the restriction of mana value and stuff, and it being 1v1, some of the things that aren't banned in Commander, but that are like with the whole game changer system, are like considered bracketed higher in a social setting. We don't have to worry about banning those or anything, because some of them just straight up don't exist here because they're really high mana value. Like, we don't have to deal with Force of Will, even though it's quote unquote free. It's 5 mana, so it's not legal here. And there's like almost no way to do mass land destruction. There is like, you can do staxing stuff in a prison perspective, but like that's one of the only things. Similar to like super hard control, you can just, if you're playing really casual, rule zero that out. But if it's not a problem competitively, we don't need to ban it. The other thing, in terms of just implementation, that I was thinking about that I wanted to touch back on when we're talking about having, I think the pings are good. We could have a discussion about like how nuanced you want to get with them. Like, is it just regular and then competitive, or do you want to get into like have a ping for specifically event testing? It's like, I think it's better to have like only like 1 or 2 pings and then encourage people to do like a quick little blurb maybe. And we see this a lot on the server where people state that they're testing something that's a spicy brew, or when you have SCT coming up, people are like, oh, I'm going to test for SCT. So not only is this competitive, but I literally want you to bring the best thing that you can think of because I want the best testing possible. And I mean, that's an extension of a rule zero in a sense. Before, you're just advertising it up front. But also with having the competitive seller, much like having all the threads for the individual commanders that exist, that's important to know where you're going to do things. And I also think that in general, when we are talking about adding extra forums or threads or whatever, I very much believe that they should be mostly oriented towards competitive players, because competitive players are invested. They understand jargon and they understand direction and stuff like that. Because if you see a place, if you're really casual and new here and you see general chat name tavern and then a casual seller or whatever, right? You might not really on the surface understand what the difference in that means. You might not know to go to one place or the other. But a competitive player is going to see competitive seller and tavern and have the much easier understanding of, I've spent time in this server, I understand what all these sort of delineations and stuff are for, that I think they attach to that faster and make better use of that. Whereas a casual person can just sit in the general chat about, and get directed to specific places if they need to by other community members. Because at the end of the day, a lot of the stuff, regardless of what the committee does, is going to come down to, as Gray said before, how the community is, right? What the community does and says and acts is going to have a big influence on that. And I think as long as people are being interacting with people in good faith and directing them towards the right areas to talk about things, I think that most of what we're doing now and any little bits we add on top of that should generally be good. And I think we're going in a good direction with that.
You bring up a very good point that a lot of this is dependent on the community acting in good faith. And that is really important because the committee can only do so much if the community at large isn't willing or able to basically help itself. Uh, People have to be willing to step up and see the good things that are happening and promote them, or see things that aren't necessarily in line with what this community or this format is about, and look at ways to mitigate, minimize, or just outright stop those things. Because as Cosmo said, there's only 16 of us. We can't be everywhere, see everything, and do everything. We are very limited in what we can do, and even with that, I think we're honestly a little stretched thin. So we rely a lot on the community to help moderate itself.
Yeah, we certainly can't. We certainly can't be like cracking down on every channel. The only ones we really like make sure things are clean over on is Gray's domain, the Ask a Certified Judge, and that's enough effort as it usually is.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the interesting elements, I do 100% agree with Abby that the more competitively minded people are going to be the one that most want to use the resources at their disposal and will be likely the most familiar with the ins and outs of where to go, what to do. And so having the surface level things be the most open to casual folks is a interesting and probably fairly good idea. Just because for those casual folks that are just bumbling on in, the more experienced players, which, as we've kind of established, end up usually going to be a bit more competitive, will know where to guide them and know where to go themselves. I think one of the struggles with this particular question is that every member of the committee, save maybe one or two people, but by and large, the committee is full of people that have obviously been here a while, but also just people that are competitively minded. And so we have a bit of a problem with not quite being able to easily cater towards casual folks because we don't have those casual people that are given the microphone. And I don't know the best way to deal with that, but I think the good stepping point is, if you're a casual person listening in, give us your thoughts, especially if you are new to the server, what your surface level impressions are about the conversation, about the people, about the events, and let us know what you would like to see more of. And obviously the same thing goes with casual players, with competitive players, sorry, is, we need to hear your thoughts. We need feedback. Feedback is always good. To be, I think, one of the things that I struggled with before we expanded our group to include a few more people and to rise other folks in the committee to higher rankings is that I felt that the committee itself felt kind of closed off, and I think that's through no fault of any one particular person. They just didn't have the right avenues. And I think part of this podcast idea is to have more discussion and to give more resources for people to talk and to have a platform. And so obviously we have a little bit of that with, hopefully every podcast will have one non-committee member at least on it. But another part of it is this is a place for committee members to give their thoughts on the format as a whole and to ask for the community's thoughts on our thoughts and to give us some feedback on what you would want to see more of, what you would want to see less of. And hopefully it'll work, but if not, please let us know. That ended up feeling kind of closurely, but if other people have thoughts, I'm not trying to stifle that. So, what are you guys' thoughts?
While you were talking about the server and the surface level parts, I can't remember if it was Abby or Esper that talked about investment and having those surface level resources for those who aren't as invested is a good thing, but then also having there be reasons and rewards for becoming more invested is also a good thing, which again is part of the reason why there was that lean towards having competitive only spaces versus casual only spaces. Again, it wasn't to sequester, but it was, hey, you are the ones who have put in the time and effort and are invested in this format, so therefore you are the ones who get your own space, where it is just those who have been invested, who are involved, who actually put in the time and effort in this format to have your own dedicated space.
Yeah, no, I think I think they also, in that way, it functions sort of like a stepping stone that you would in a lot of other ways, right? Because you don't want to come into something as a completely new person to it and be overwhelmed with not knowing where to go, what to do, and all this sort of stuff like that. And at the very least, having certain things labeled in a way that I think makes it easily readable, that like, oh, this is a more advanced thing you get into when you're later, right? Like if you open up the menu for something, and there's like the tutorial and then a bunch of options about like advanced things to get into. It doesn't matter how new you are to it, as long as you understand the words you're reading. Like you start at the top with the really obvious things, and if something looks or sounds like it's really advanced, you just won't go there yet, and that's fine. And you probably won't accidentally find yourself getting in that space. And that's a good way because, the invested players will know where they want to go, know how to make use of the resources, and it will help put up like clear signposts that you don't need to go here right away. You can start casual and get into that later if you want, and you also don't need to, right? There's nothing requiring you to go there. So that's why, again, to just reiterate it, I really think that as much as possible, the fine, granular extra spaces should always lean competitive and more involved and focused, because the people who want to use those will make the best use of them, and it keeps things well organized, and I think is simple for the vast majority of people that way.
I think that's actually I think I agree with that. I also feel this is something that I've had floating around a little bit, and maybe this isn't the time to open that can of worms, but I'm wondering, we have pretty much all of our events are going to be catered towards competitive people, because, yeah, that's the best way to experience competitive gameplay is to enter a league or a tournament of some kind, and to prove yourself there. But one of the things is, I don't know what if we should have something like that for casual folks. I don't know what a casual event would be like. I think we have some interesting ideas with our community tournaments, where it is a expansion on the rules, and while a lot of people do approach that from a more competitive angle, it is inherently unexplored space and doing things a bit sillier than normal. And so, for those like micro formats within Tiny Leaders, it can be a good opportunity for more casual folks, but I also don't know if there is a better way to do that based off of the standard TLR rules on if there should be a competitive and a casual tournament, or if if all the casual folks need is an LFG channel and they'll take it from there. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I mean, I'm always down for any excuse to cube, and I do have a TLR cube.
Ooh,
Oh, we do
okay.
love Cube.
Yeah, I like that.
I think the
Yeah,
biggest. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I will say, I do personally think that the general best idea for giving space to casual players is similar to what I've been saying about like just the way forums and stuff and threads and yada yada are set up, and that I think the just broad openness of LFG is the best space to allow people playing casually in. Much like the way that like you go to your LGS and it's like, oh, it's Commander Day, so there's just open tables, and I mean some LGSs charge money. That doesn't really influence this, but you go, you just find pods, you sit down, you say, hey, you want to play? You find people, you sit down. I think that is the general that leads itself open. It's easy to understand when you get in, and that the structure of events is more so a thing you do when you get more involved. Because I know it's just prizing, because like I've seen this happen sometimes when stores have hosted non-CEDH EDH events that do have prizing, because that incentivizes people to play to win, but not quite at CEDH level. And then that sort of gets in this weird gray area of, well, if you're trying to win, you don't. How nice do you need to be? How much, like, do you have to rule zero an event? Because like that's the thing, right? We're supposed to say you don't rule zero an event. An event's an event, and people come and sign up to play under the rules. So I think that generally speaking, I mean, like events at like a convention level is a slightly different thing, but I think it's just like having a really big LGS at that point. I think just the general open space is where casuals do their best and should be given the space. But I also do, small point, want to say that the community tournaments, I love them, they're cool, but they're a niche layer on top of that I think is maybe not the thing to introduce new players with, but that's a personal preference. So
Yeah.
I'll
If you're
say
trying
that.
to,
I was going to say that have the biggest issue with having sort of casual tournaments, especially if you do prizing, is that, I mean, what's stopping someone from doing a more competitive thing? At some point, an arbitrary line has to be drawn, and then they can try to be competitive up to that line. Where just having a LFG, this is open, hey, I'm trying to play a casual game. I mean, there's not really an incentive to do that. There's not really an incentive to try to push the boundary there, because you know you're playing a casual game, and they know that, and everyone is just in complete agreement on that.
Yeah. I think if there were to be some sort of casual event, I don't think there should be prizing in any way, shape, or form. I think Abby brought up an interesting point, which maybe is something we could do, maybe is something we shouldn't do. Of like, yeah, there is Commander Nights sometimes at local game stores, and we're not an LGS. We are kind of open 24/7, so it's not like we need to provide a space for people, but maybe we could have a like casual day or something like that where people are encouraged to bring their jank, you know? So, I don't know. Something to think on.
Yeah.
So that's actually, sorry, Esper actually brought up the point that I was gonna make. So beat me to it. That you can't really have a quote unquote casual event with any kind of prizing and not also clearly define what casual is. But also, if you want to have a casual event, just define what kind of casualness you're looking for. There have been a few times over the years where WotC has put out their like officially sanctioned casual stuff, like show up with a deck that you get points for flavor, or you get points for doing X Y Z, and those points that you get by doing these weird offshoot things matter more than the points you get for winning your games or matches.
We love the Pride Month. Every commander has partner now.
Oh yeah, no, and stuff like that. Like that's the thing is, if we wanted to suggest an event that was like that had some alternative goal that wasn't winning, that's what you're trying to do. I think that is totally an interesting thing to potentially look into and run. But I do think that it's just, I don't think we need to do much more in terms of providing a space, because like we've said, we're open 24/7 realistically. As long as people want to show up and play, we don't have like a game store where it's like an employee needs to be in the store to make sure things are going on and the lights need to be on. It needs to be business hours. Our commander game night is just if someone shows up and there are other people to play with on the server. I think the LFG is just open play tables at all points in time. I think it is very much a, hey, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, and I think the biggest question, which kind of brings up my point earlier, is it broke? I don't know. Because, again, we're all competitive folks here, and most of our folks are competitive. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're trying to push out casual folks. It just means we don't really have a great way for the casual folks to talk about things. We need to actually give them a platform. So, if you are a casual player of TLR and you've stumbled across our server and you think that there is an idea for what would make it more accessible to you, or if you feel that we are accessible enough for casual play, let us know, because I think that's very valuable feedback for us.
Do we do some sign-offs?
Yeah, I think that's a good note to leave it off on.
All right. Well, thank you all for hosting this first podcast. And if you want to see a specific podcast topic, feel free to leave a comment or post it in the Discord somewhere. Potentially, we should. This is a completely unrelated thing, but maybe we should create a specifically YouTube suggestions or podcast suggestions channel where people can give particular thoughts about future or past YouTube videos / podcasts. But overall, it has been great having this first podcast, and I'm excited to do more. Feel free to subscribe, and if you haven't already, there's going to be more Tiny Leaders. This is a Tiny Leaders channel. If you want to see Tiny Leaders, subscribe to get more Tiny Leaders.
We play Tiny Leaders.
Yes. And I've been the Cosmerian.
I've been Esper.
I've been Gray. Be safe, be well, and be good to each other.
I've been Abby. Thank you for having me. Who knows if you'll ever see me again, but it was a pleasure.
And yeah, stay tiny, and we'll see you out there.
Stay tiny, folks.